Shooters are chaotic. Smoke, explosions, blinding light. In the confusion, you need to be able to see your targets and engage them accurately.
Target down.
In recent years, there's been one Russian optic that gamers have been growing very fond of because of its ability to see through the chaos. Of course, I'm talking about the OKP-7. Despite its prevalence in military shooters, the OKP-7 was actually originally intended as an optic for civilians. This is not meant to denigrate the quality of the OKP. For uses such as hunting or target shooting, having a well-made optic is imperative. That's why this video is brought to you by today's sponsor, Gunnar. Gunnar is a new optics company that delivers top-tier performance without the hefty price tag. Just look at their Heimdall high-power variable optic. It uses German shot glass, which is incredibly clear and has amazing light transmission, allowing you to see beyond 1,000 yards even in low light conditions. And if you need to shoot far, the locking turrets prevent accidental adjustments, while the quick zero-stop design allows instant return to your zero point. The turrets themselves are 1/8 MOA clicks, which allows you to fine-tune adjustments for long-range accuracy. The Heimdall HPVO is made out of 7075 aluminum. It's lightweight, yet incredibly durable. Built to withstand heavy calibers, this scope is made to last. And of course, it's a first focal plane optic, ensuring that your holdovers remain consistent at all magnification levels. The Heimdall HPVO is an incredible optic, and I've personally been using the hell out of this scope. Don't wait to pick one of these up. Gunnar is currently running a 50% off deal on this scope, and you'll even get a free mount and case included. And if you want an even bigger discount, use my code CUO10 to get an additional 10% off. But be quick, this special offer ends on November 30th. Thank you again to Gunnar for sponsoring this video. The origin of the OKP series of optics is not clear. Some sources state it was Russian company Priestley Narod who developed the optic, while others credit Axion with its inception. Either way, the OKP series of optics began in 1999 with the OKP-1. This was an optic meant for both rifled and smoothbore firearms. In Russia, a license is needed to own firearms for the purposes of hunting. And in the first 5 years of an individual having this license, they may only own smoothbore firearms for hunting. So, creating an optic meant for smoothbore firearms made sense in the Russian market. The OKP series of optics was meant to be a competitor to the Cobra sight. The Cobra is an optic preferred by many Russians, but it does have some downsides for the purposes of hunting. The field of view can feel limited. The Cobra is fairly heavy, and there is no auto adjustment for brightness. So, the OKP addressed all these limitations. It has an incredibly large window that makes it very easy to identify targets, as well as having a very thin housing to minimize obstruction. It's also significantly lighter than the Cobra and automatically adjusts brightness depending on ambient lighting. For the purpose of hunting, these were significant benefits. The initial iteration of the OKP appeared to be a success, because it subsequently went through 7 more iterations. The OKP-7 was released in 2006, the penultimate in the OKP series. It retained the thin housing, light weight, and auto-adjust brightness of the previous versions. Additionally, the OKP-7 is also offered in both the traditional Russian side mount or also as a Picatinny rail-mounted optic, allowing the sight to be mounted to modern firearms that come with rails. The OKP-7 is also offered in a variety of different reticle and colors, to accommodate different shooters' preferences. For hunting and sport shooting, it's easy to see why the OKP-7 works well. The large window, lighter weight, and thin housing makes it a comfortable optic to carry around and very easy to look through. But while it was intended to be an optic for hunting, the OKP would attract the attention of an entirely different type of shooter. Perhaps because of the innovation involved with its creation, the OKP caught the attention of the Russian military. Though never officially adopted, there are multiple instances of Russian special forces using the optic. But while evidence of their use by these units is inarguable, the fact that it happened at all is somewhat unexpected. It's especially surprising to see the OKP-7 used in this manner, because some of the selling points of the OKP-7 would almost certainly be considered downsides in a military setting. To break this down, we need to first discuss how the OKP-7 works. It's fairly simple. Light from an LED shines onto the lens, which reflects the image of a reticle back to the shooter's eye. This is the same principle that most modern red dots use to operate. However, compared to most modern red dots, the OKP-7 lacks a lot of features. To achieve its light weight, the OKP does not have a housing to cover the emitter, and barely anything to cover the glass. This leaves both exposed to the elements. An ingress of dirt, dust, or anything else could obstruct the emitter, which would impede the projection of the reticle. To reduce weight, the OKP-7 also has an incredibly thin housing. Most optics have relatively thick housings to make the body stronger. This is especially true of optics designed for military use, as they are much more likely to take impacts. And while the argument is that the thinner housing provides a greater field of view, there's a very simple solution to increasing your field of view while shooting any red dot. Open both eyes. When shooting red dots, it's always better to shoot with both eyes open. This allows a shooter to retain their natural peripheral vision, and if done correctly, the housing of the optic will fade away. All the shooter should see is the reticle superimposed on the target. In other words, when shooting with both eyes open, the housing of the optic should not obscure the target, no matter its thickness. Making the housing of an optic thinner to increase FOV is simply reducing the durability of the sight for no real benefit. And one more potential downside is the lack of a manual brightness adjustment. Typically, most people prefer to adjust the brightness manually to their eye, rather than allowing technology to calibrate it automatically. While it can sometimes work well, it's always good to have a backup manual adjustment in case the brightness sensor fails, or if the brightness needs to be turned down beyond what the software deems usable. The OKP-7 was not designed as a military optic, so it makes sense that durability was sacrificed to benefit ease of use. But even though Russian special forces did test the optic, it has never seen widespread use among such units, much less the Russian military at large. The potential problems of such an optic do not justify its benefits in that environment. Despite existing since 2006, the OKP-7 has remained a relatively unknown optic outside of Russia. And even inside the country, the optic is, by all accounts, somewhat rare. Unlike most other optics, the OKP-7 is made to order, with customers receiving their optic almost a year after putting the money down for it. It makes sense that most individuals would rather buy something more available on the market. So for a long time, the OKP-7 was not seen in games. But one game would change it all. Escape from Tarkov is a Russian-made first-person shooter. First unveiled in 2015, the game pits players against each other in an alternate version of Russia. Of course, much of the weapons and gear are Russian as well. And it was in this shooter that the OKP-7 first appeared. Just as in real life, it was available as a dovetail version and a Picatinny rail mount version. This was the first time many people outside of Russia had ever seen a representation of the optic, and it certainly stood out. Compared to most other optics, the OKP-7 looks fairly unique. And it was while playing the game that people began to see the advantages of the OKP7 in games. In almost every shooter, optic housings are rendered in full. So unlike in real life, the housing of an optic can significantly obscure a target. Optics with very thin housings have been historically popular in games for this reason. Even certain optics that have never seen any kind of serious use in the real world remain popular in games because of how unobtrusive their housings are. And since factors like durability and protection from the elements aren't factors in games, there isn't really any downside to choosing these types of optics in games. It's likely for this reason that the OKP7 is a favorite in Tarkov. A clear sight picture is imperative in a game where a single bullet can instantly end you. But even though it was a popular sight in that game, the OKP7 was still a relatively unknown optic. While Escape from Tarkov grew in popularity fairly quickly, it was still a niche game. The sight did show up in some other games, but its exposure remained somewhat limited. That is, until a certain shooter decided it was time for a reinvention of itself. At the beginning of 2019, Call of Duty was in somewhat of a slump. While it certainly was the most popular shooter in the world, people were tired of the directions the games were going in, whether it was half-baked depictions of historical events, or futuristic settings that were devoid of any gravitas. The franchise was due for a change. So, 2019's Modern Warfare took the franchise back to its grounded roots. No longer would jetpacks and cringy characters populate the battlefield. Instead, plate carriers, night vision, and realistic weapons would be the highlights of the game. And just like the older games, the Russians would once again be the antagonists. So of course, Russian weapons and gear are featured in the game. One of the sight options is the OKP7. And in Modern Warfare 2019, this optic became a favorite of many. Just like its real counterpart, the OKP7 in-game had a large sight window, thin housing, and overall unobtrusive profile. For a fast-paced shooter where gunfights primarily happen in close quarters, it was perfect. And once it got into the hands of those who were obsessed with winning, it became a fan favorite. Of course, the OKP7's depiction in games didn't stop there. Once it became clear how effective the sight was in games, it seemed like every modern military shooter had it as an option. Even in games where it would make no sense for it to be included, it's there. But the reason why it's so good in games isn't just due to the optic itself. A big component of its popularity is because of the way modern shooters are designed. It seems like more and more shooters are leaning towards closer range engagements, rather than longer ones. Where a wider variety of optics are viable in medium to longer range firefights, reflex sights like the OKP7 dominate in close quarters. It's funny to think about how an optic designed for hunting wildlife in Russia has become a favorite of gamers around the world. Who would have guessed that optimizing an optic for clarity in the field would have attracted an audience that never goes outside? In a gunfight, seeing is everything. Whether you're hunting a large animal in real life or in games, you need to be able to positively identify your target before making the shot. In real life, high-quality glass, durability, and good quality control all contribute to a clear sight picture. But in games, a large window and thin housing is all that's needed. And the OKP7 is an optic which certainly has both, and thus is a favorite in shooters. Neglected in real life, yet adored by gamers, the OKP7 has become more popular than its creators could have ever imagined. Perhaps in the future, we'll see a new OKP optic that addresses some of its shortcomings in the real world. But for now, it remains an obsolete sight that will continue to dominate shooters for years to come. Thank you for watching. If you want to see a full overview of the OKP7 featured in this video, be sure to check out this video on my second channel. And thank you again to Gunner for sponsoring this video.